My name is Claire Reynolds, and I am 40 years old. For most of my adult life, I was married to Michael, my husband of 18 years. We had a son, Ethan, who was 17 at the time when everything started to fall apart. From the outside, we looked like any other middle-class family: steady jobs, a decent home, a child on his way to college. But underneath, things had been quietly eroding for years. I met Michael when I was working at a small hair salon right after high school. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man who paid his bills on time and never raised his voice. At first, that stability was everything I thought I wanted. He encouraged me to open my own salon, and over the years, I built Radiance Hair Studio, a place that became my pride and joy. The salon grew, and eventually I was earning more than Michael did at his insurance job. That shift in balance was subtle but powerful. I began to feel like the one carrying more energy, more passion, more life into our marriage. Michael wasn't a bad husband. He was dependable, responsible, but he was also distant in ways that cut deeper as the years went by. Our dinners became quiet affairs, our conversations reduced to short updates about Ethan's grades or bills that needed paying. The intimacy faded until it felt like we were just roommates who shared a last name. That's when I made my first real mistake. My car had been making a noise, a high-pitched squeal from the brakes. Normally, Michael handled those things, but he had been so busy buried in his paperwork that I didn't even bother asking. Instead, I drove to a small auto shop on the edge of town called Derek's Garage. Derek, the owner, was everything Michael wasn't. Rough around the edges, tattooed arms, grease-stained hands, but he carried himself with a boldness that felt magnetic. He looked at me like I wasn't just another woman coming in for service, but someone worth noticing. That first visit should have been simple: brake pads replaced, bill paid, and nothing more. But Derek smiled in a way that stayed with me. He complimented my salon, said he'd heard of it, asked about my life with genuine curiosity. I brushed it off, but when I left, I caught myself thinking about him more than I should have. It didn't take long for me to find excuses to return. A quick tune-up, a tire rotation, something small that didn't really require my attention, but gave me an excuse to stop by. Each time, the conversations grew longer. I started to feel alive in ways I hadn't in years. Derek was divorced twice, a man with a messy past, but that danger, that unpredictability, was exactly what made him intoxicating. Soon, stopping by the shop wasn't enough. We started meeting at a cheap motel off the highway. It wasn't glamorous, but for me, it felt like an escape. I told myself it wasn't really about love. It was about being seen, being touched, being reminded that I was still desired. At home, I played the part of the wife. I cooked dinner, made small talk, scrolled on my phone beside Michael, as though nothing had changed. But the truth was, I was slipping further into a life built on lies. It didn't take long for Michael to notice something was off. He never confronted me directly at first, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching too closely, paying attention to small details. He was an insurance adjuster, a man trained to look for inconsistencies, and I was giving him plenty. One evening, while I stirred pasta sauce in the kitchen, he casually mentioned finding something strange in the back seat of his SUV. My heart nearly stopped, but I forced myself to keep stirring, pretending his words didn't matter. He said it was a used condom. I told him it must have been Ethan's, throwing our son under suspicion just to protect myself. He didn't push further that night, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't convinced. Lying beside him in bed later, I could feel the silence between us stretch like a chasm. I scrolled through my phone, hiding messages from Derek, giggling at his words as though Michael weren't lying just inches away. I didn't see it then, but that was when everything started to unravel. I believed I was being discreet. I thought I was in control of the situation, that Michael's obliviousness would shield me. But I underestimated him. What I didn't know was that he had already started collecting proof, documenting my movements, and building the case that would one day expose me in the most humiliating way possible. At the time, I thought I was balancing two lives, but in truth, both were already collapsing. First update. After that night when Michael casually mentioned the condom, something inside me shifted. I tried to convince myself I had handled it well, that blaming Ethan was enough to throw him off. But deep down, I knew my husband wasn't a fool. Michael never raised his voice, never accused me outright, but he had this way of observing, of piecing things together quietly. I had seen him at work sometimes, reviewing claims, finding the small eyes in someone's story. Now those sharp eyes were turned on me. At first, I brushed it aside. I told myself he was too passive, too careful, that even if he suspected, he'd never act on it. That was my arrogance. I thought I was smarter than him, thought I could juggle Derek and my marriage without consequences. I kept sneaking away, parking my car at the same motel, meeting Derek between his repair jobs, convincing myself it was harmless as long as I returned home to cook dinner and smile at Ethan. But Michael noticed the small cracks. The mileage on the SUV. Receipts left in the console. My phone lighting up too often at night. He never shouted, but I could feel the distance widening. He stopped touching me in bed, stopped asking about my day beyond the basics. He started keeping a small notebook with him more often, and though he never said why, I could feel it had something to do with me. Meanwhile, Derek and I carried on like nothing else mattered. He wasn't refined, not even close. His garage smelled of oil and sweat, his hands were always rough, but when he pulled me close, I felt wanted in a way Michael hadn't made me feel in years. He told me I was beautiful, said I was strong, said I deserved more than a husband who buried himself in paperwork. I clung to those words, even though a part of me knew Derek wasn't capable of offering anything stable. I started lying more boldly. If I left the salon for an hour, I told my staff I was running errands. If I came home late, I told Michael there was a customer emergency. It became routine. But guilt crept in at strange moments, when Ethan asked me for help with his homework, when Michael absent-mindedly made me coffee in the morning, when I saw our wedding photo still hanging in the hallway. For a brief second, shame would wash over me, but then Derek would send a message, and the guilt faded into desire. The day everything truly began to spiral, I remember Michael watching me from across the living room. I was curled up on the couch, texting Derek, smiling at his crude jokes. Michael asked who it was. I told him it was a coworker, another stylist at the salon. He didn't argue. He just watched me with those quiet, steady eyes that made me uneasy. Later, when I went to the bathroom, I had no idea he'd taken my phone and mirrored the screen to our television. When I came back, my secret was splashed across the 70-inch screen for both of us to see. Messages between Derek and me. Words of lust, plans for the next meeting, compliments I had craved but shouldn't have sought. My face burned as I lunged for the remote, but Michael was already holding it. He didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He just stared at me with a look I can't erase from my memory. It wasn't rage, it was disappointment, heavy and cutting, the kind that sinks deeper than anger ever could. I tried to defend myself, told him it wasn't what it looked like, told him I only wanted to feel appreciated again, told him that he had stopped seeing me years ago. The truth? I wasn't even sure what I was saying anymore. They were excuses, thin walls against the avalanche that was about to crush me. Michael didn't fight me on the details. He didn't plead or cry. He just looked at me like a stranger, then walked away without another word. That silence was worse than any argument. In the days that followed, I could feel him pulling away completely. He still lived under the same roof, but it was like sharing a house with someone who had already left. He moved around with purpose, always writing things down, always on his laptop or phone. I thought he was distracting himself, but the truth was, he was preparing something I never saw coming. Derek, of course, was no help. When I told him Michael knew, he laughed it off. So what? He's boring. You're with me now. That kind of arrogance should have warned me, but I was too wrapped up in the fantasy to listen. I told myself Michael would never truly act on it, that maybe we would separate quietly, maybe even divorce without drama. I underestimated just how far he would go. Michael wasn't planning to save our marriage. He was planning to destroy the life I had built around lies, brick by brick, until I was left standing in the ruins with nothing but regret. At the time, I didn't see it coming. I thought I still had control, but I was already caught in a trap I couldn't escape. Second update. By the time weeks had passed since Michael caught me, I had convinced myself that maybe things were settling. He was cold, yes, but not confrontational. We moved around each other in silence, slept in the same bed like strangers, and spoke only about practical things: bills, schedules, Ethan. I thought maybe he was still deciding what to do. I clung to the hope that, somehow, this storm would blow over. I poured myself into my salon during those weeks. Radiance Hair Studio was preparing for our annual customer appreciation event, the one day every year when we transformed the space into more than a salon. It was always full of women dressed nicely, sipping wine, chatting, and reminding me why I had built this place in the first place. It was the heart of my life, the thing I could proudly call my own. I needed it more than ever to distract me from the tension at home. So when Michael suddenly offered to help with the event, I took it as a sign. He mentioned bringing in a projector, suggested we put together a slideshow for the clients. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe he was softening. Maybe he was trying to show support again. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe he was giving me a chance to redeem myself. The day of the event, the salon was full. Music played softly, the smell of wine and cheese mingled with hairspray and perfume, and laughter bounced off the walls. I dressed carefully that morning, wanting to look confident, wanting to look like I still had control of something in my life. When Michael arrived with the projector, I felt almost relieved. He was quiet, but he was there. I didn't know I had walked straight into the trap he had been building piece by piece. When it was time for the presentation, I gathered the clients, ready to smile and thank them for their loyalty. Michael stood at the front, calm and composed, like he was just there to help. He clicked on the first slide, our wedding photo. My chest tightened. The second slide, the salon's grand opening, years ago, when I cut the ribbon and held Ethan as a baby. I felt tears prickle my eyes. For a moment, I thought maybe he was honoring me. Then the third slide appeared, and my world cracked open. It was my car parked at the Starlight Motel. The timestamp glared at me from the corner of the screen. My heart stopped. The room fell silent. The next slide was another photo, my car outside Derek's garage. Then came screenshots of text messages. Words I had typed without a thought now lit up in bold letters for every client, every friend, every woman in that room to see. Compliments, innuendos, plans for secret meetings. The words that had once made me feel desired now branded me as unfaithful. A wave of whispers spread through the room. Faces I had known for years. Women who had trusted me with their hair, their secrets, their friendship, were now staring at me with disbelief, pity, and disgust. My legs trembled so hard I thought I might collapse. Michael kept clicking. Each slide was another knife. A receipt from Derek's garage. A photo pulled from my phone. Derek shirtless, grinning, looking like every stereotype of the man who destroys marriages. And then, as if the humiliation wasn't enough, Michael played a recording. Derek's voice filled the room, mocking me, bragging about using me, laughing at how little I knew about cars, and even hinting at how much he hoped to get from me financially. Every word stripped away the last shred of dignity I had left. I wanted to scream at Michael to stop. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The whispers around me grew louder, women exchanging shocked looks, some openly shaking their heads. These were my clients, my community, the very people who had built my business with their loyalty. Now, they were watching me fall apart in real time. I stumbled to the bathroom, tears already smearing my makeup. My reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable. Red eyes, shaking hands, a face that looked 10 years older in a single moment. I could still hear Derek's voice echoing from the speakers in the other room, replaying every humiliating word. When I finally forced myself back out, the damage was done. The slideshow had ended, but the silence in the room was louder than any sound. Michael was calmly packing up the projector, while every pair of eyes was still fixed on me. Women I had styled for years avoided my gaze. Some looked at me with anger, others with pity. My salon, my sanctuary, felt like a courtroom, and I was the guilty defendant. I tried to speak, tried to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, but my voice shook and cracked. No one wanted to hear it. The judgment was already written on their faces. My betrayal wasn't just against my husband. It had become public property, a scandal laid bare for everyone to consume. Michael walked out without another glance at me, leaving me standing in the ruins of my reputation. That moment broke something inside me. By the end of that week, half my appointments had been canceled. By the end of the month, I had only a fraction of my regular clients left. Every time the phone rang, I dreaded hearing another cancellation. Word traveled fast in a small town, and soon my salon wasn't known for beauty, it was known for betrayal. I had destroyed my marriage, but worse, I had destroyed myself in front of the very people who once admired me. And there was no way to undo it. Final update. After the salon event, nothing was ever the same again. My life split into two timelines that day, the one I had before Michael exposed me, and the wreckage I lived in afterward. Radiance Hair Studio, once the center of my pride, began crumbling almost immediately. Clients canceled in waves, some without explanation, others with cutting honesty. I don't feel comfortable coming there anymore. I need to find someone I can trust. Trust, that was the word that echoed in my head because I had lost it everywhere. My business wasn't just about hair. It was about relationships, secrets, confidence. And no one wanted those things in the hands of a woman who had humiliated herself and her family in public. By the end of the month, the salon was nearly empty most days. I still opened, still swept the floors, still turned on the lights, but the chatter, the laughter, the comfort, it was gone. Even the women who stayed only came for gossip, not for loyalty. Every snip of the scissors felt like punishment. At home, things were worse. Michael moved into an apartment across town, and Ethan split his time between us. My son looked at me differently now. He was respectful, but quiet, withdrawn. One night, as I tried to make small talk over dinner, he finally asked, "Mom, why did you do it?" There was no answer I could give him that wouldn't sound hollow. I told him I felt lonely, that I made a mistake, that it wasn't about him or his father. But the truth was too simple and too ugly. I wanted excitement, and I traded stability for something fleeting. Ethan didn't argue, but the disappointment in his eyes was worse than any words. The divorce was finalized months later. Michael got the house, half the salon's value, and custody of Ethan for most of the week. I was left with my car, my dwindling business, and the heavy silence of a life I had ruined. Derek, the man I had risked everything for, disappeared quickly after Michael's revenge. His shop was shut down, his landlord evicted him, and he left town before I could even make sense of it. All those words about how alive he made me feel turned to dust. He hadn't cared about me at all, only about what he could get. The humiliation didn't fade. People in town looked at me differently, whispered when I walked by. At the grocery store, at church, even in line for coffee, I could feel the stares. I had become the example everyone used to warn each other. The woman who threw away her marriage, her business, and her dignity for a fling with a mechanic. Months later, I ran into Michael at the grocery store. I wasn't alone. 2 women from my old client list were with me, chatting by the wine section. We were laughing lightly, trying to escape the heavy air that followed me everywhere, when suddenly he turned the corner. My chest tightened immediately. Michael looked calm, carrying his basket, dressed neatly, as if nothing had ever touched him. Meanwhile, I felt exposed, my face burning under the fluorescent lights. The other women fell silent instantly, their eyes darting between us. I tried to speak, but he beat me to it. He nodded politely to the women, then looked at me with that same steady expression he had worn the night of the slideshow. Not angry, not triumphant, just cold, detached. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, that I regretted everything, that I wished I could undo the choices I made. But the words stuck in my throat. All I managed was, "You humiliated me." My voice sounded weaker than I intended. He answered evenly, "I documented your choices." That single sentence cut deeper than any insult. Because he was right. I had made the choices. I had created the lies. He only revealed them. For a long moment, we stood there surrounded by bottles of wine and shelves of groceries, having the conversation we should have had before the betrayal, before the lies grew too big. I told him I had loved him, that what I did wasn't love, but a desperate attempt to feel something different.
He didn't argue.
He only looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Next time you want something different, ask for it before you go looking for it in someone else's garage." Then he walked away, leaving me standing with my shame. That was the last real conversation we ever had. Now, when I sit alone in my quiet apartment, I replay everything in my mind. The motel rooms, the lies, the excitement that blinded me, and finally the silence that followed the exposure. I tell myself sometimes that Michael went too far, that public humiliation was cruel, that there were other ways to end things. But when I strip the excuses away, I know the truth. I wasn't destroyed by Michael. I was destroyed by myself. Because I chose Derek over my husband. Because I chose a fleeting thrill over the family we had built. Because I believed I was too clever to be caught. In the end, I lost everything. My marriage, my reputation, my business, and the respect of my son. And all for a man who never cared for me at all. Some nights, when the apartment is too quiet, I stare at old photos of our family and wonder if there was ever a turning point where I could have stopped myself. Maybe when I first walked into Derek's shop. Maybe when Michael asked about the condom. Maybe when I looked into my husband's tired eyes and still chose to lie. But there are no second chances in real life. Only consequences. And now I live with mine.